The Nigerian Stock Exchange yesterday bucked a three-day losing streak to close up by 21 basis points. The market session was upbeat and all sectors closed in positive territory, focusing particularly on consumer goods. Sector was up by 0.65%, propelled by international breweries that was up by 4.95%, Flour Mills of Nigeria PLC up by 4.34%, and Guinness up by 299 basis points. Joining us to discuss the consumer goods sector is Dr. Omobola Adu, who is an investment research analyst with Afrinvest Research and Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us. Good morning to you, Doctor.
Thank you for having me.
Great stuff. So look, as far as consumer goods is concerned, I mean, we've seen some decent earnings recently. Talk of, Flour Mills, Unilever, Guinness. Can you take us through, I guess, some of the drivers of, behind these companies and how they've done okay?
Yes, thank you once again. So we noticed that last year, in general, the consumer goods sector did pretty okay. We look at companies like Flour Mill, did about 48% increase in revenue and around 10% increase in their profit after tax to about over just 800 billion and around 17 billion in profit after tax for the 9 months of last year. We also have companies like Unilever that did about 35% increase in their revenue and about 135% increase in their profits after tax, just to going roughly around 1 billion. The first time they are making positive or profits in the last 3 years or so. They've been badly hit by the effect of the pandemic and coming out of the previous recession. Guinness also, their 6 months financial performance for last year showed that in terms of revenue, the revenue grew roughly around 50%, and their profit after tax did roughly around over 2,000%, wow, going to roughly around 9 billion, largely because they made a loss last year. But in general, the sector did pretty well. Largely because we know that the economy came out of the pandemic-induced recession, economic activities basically improved. Available statistics from MBS showed that in terms of aggregate consumer spending last year, as our Q2 grew roughly around 45% to around 17 trillion. If you compare that to 2020, where aggregate consumer spending declined by around 18%. So the general improvement in spending by consumers generally impacted the consumer goods space. We also look at it in terms of what they've been doing in terms of strategies. So we know that this sector is typically price sensitive in terms of, and there are a large number of substitute goods. So it's basically a volumes game. And how have they been able to stay afloat or to keep doing business is roughly in terms of strategies around packaging. We're seeing these companies doing more sachet kind of products in order to still maintain their market share. And because of things like this, they've been able to maintain their market share and churn out these results we're seeing today.
Great stuff. Thank you for that. All these companies, from Flour Mills to Unilever to Guinness, sugar plays an important component in their products. The sugar tax, just basically looking at policy impact on the companies. What's something like that? What kind of impact is that going to have on their bottom lines?
So looking at the sugar tax, it's very interesting. So the sugar tax roughly is basically saying around 10 naira for every liter, right? If you look at the sections if you look at most of these brewing companies that churn out these non-alcoholic drinks, taking a rough estimate, this tax should basically see maybe on, let's say, a 50 cl bottle should be roughly around 5 naira as the tax they should pay. But what we are seeing is that these companies have basically tried to not take advantage, but we're seeing prices of, let's say, these non-alcoholic drinks rising by close to 20%, moving from maybe 120 to 150, whereas this tax, in a rough estimate, should roughly not increase prices by around that same proportion. So we're seeing these manufacturing companies taking, let's say, taking advantage of this situation in terms of we're looking at it from this perspective that everybody knows this tax is coming, right?
Yeah.
So it's more or less if they increase the price, you're not going to be shocked because you know that, oh, there's been a recently passed sugar tax. So in terms of bottom line, we might actually see a little bit of improvement because these companies are basically maybe on an average would increase prices maybe a little bit higher than what we are going to see for these taxatives. So in other words, they're just going to pass the effect down to the consumers.
Thank you for that. What about other FX constraints, logistics? What about other headwinds facing the sector?
Yeah, so the FX is not a new challenge. It's a challenge that they've been facing for over the last 5 years. In terms of foreign exchange losses, a lot of these companies have a lot of foreign exchange losses, and basically it emanates from when their invoices are sent to them compared to the time they have to make payment for these deals. Because of that time difference, exchange rate must have gone against them, and then they report foreign exchange losses. In terms of availability of this FX, we know how difficult it is to get FX in the country, but lately we've seen actually not stabilizing, but we have a decent sense of where the exchange rate is. But still, it's still a burden on these companies. In terms of the supply constraints, we know inflation is currently around 15.6%. On a month-to-month basis, we're seeing this price pressure points. We're seeing, and these are some of the things that still impacts their businesses, right? So if you look at it in terms of their cost of sales, roughly in this industry, the cost of sales roughly averages around above 70 to 80%, sometimes going to 90%, and it just shows you the terms of pressure these companies are facing to churn out their goods. Because, like I said earlier, because of the nature of the industry, people are a bit sensitive to prices, and because you have competitors out there, you can't just go ahead to increase your price. So basically, it's a volumes game. How quickly can you rebrand your products, taking into consideration the price effect? So these challenges are not new to the sector. It's something they've been facing for a very long time. They just have to now become more innovative in the way they do their business.
Great stuff. We've got about a minute to go. Can you quickly give us, I guess, what you expect for 2022, an outlook?
Yeah, so for this year, we expect the sector to consolidate on some of the performance they've had last year. The improving economic conditions are going to help them. This year, we project the economy to grow roughly around 2.9%. Aggregate consumption spending is also still going to improve this year. And based on these factors, we believe the sector would still do roughly well this year. And so we're looking, and we're also coming up with our industry report for the whole consumer goods space later this month or so that we'll be looking to release to the general public.
Great stuff. Dr. Omobola Adu, Investment Research Analyst, Afrinvest Research and Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about the consumer goods sector.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.